deep in the Colorado Rockies, where cell towers don't reach and rescue helicopters can't see through the pine canopy, Maya collapsed against the rusted door of an old school bus. 8 months pregnant and 3 days lost. She was dying. Her water bottle had been empty since yesterday, and the baby inside her had stopped moving. Maya's hands trembled as she realized the truth. She wasn't lost by accident. She was brought here. But by whom? And why did they need her baby? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sterile air inside the bus carried the faint scent of antiseptic, so different from the pine and earth she'd been breathing for days. Maya's legs gave way, and she sank onto what appeared to be an examination table, its surface surprisingly clean despite the bus's weathered exterior. The gentle hum of machinery suggested a power source she couldn't identify. There were no visible cables or generators. Her throat felt like sandpaper as she whispered, "Hello?" The word echoed strangely in the confined space, absorbed by equipment that looked decades ahead of anything she'd seen in her rural clinic back home. An IV stand gleamed beside her, and without thinking, she reached for the saline bag hanging from it. Her nursing training kicked in despite her confusion. She needed fluids, and she needed them now. A manila folder sat on a counter marked with her name, Subject 47, Maya Chen, her maiden name, not the married name she'd been using for the past 2 years. Inside, medical records detailed every aspect of her life from birth, childhood illnesses she'd never told anyone about, the miscarriage she'd suffered at 19 that only she and the clinic knew about, blood work results from last month's prenatal appointment. "The children never survive," a voice said behind her. Maya spun around, the IV line pulling tight. A woman stood in the bus doorway, elderly but sharp-eyed, wearing a white coat over hiking clothes. She looked familiar in a way that made Maya's chest tighten. "Dr. Vasquez?" Maya's voice cracked. "Elena, please, I've been waiting for you to find this place." The woman stepped inside, and Maya noticed she moved with the careful precision of someone accustomed to working in tight spaces, though I hoped it would be under better circumstances. "You're my mother." It wasn't a question. Biologically, yes, but it's more complicated than that. Elena approached slowly, hands visible and non-threatening. "You weren't supposed to get pregnant naturally. The genetic modifications we made should have prevented it." "Modifications?" Maya's hand instinctively moved to her belly. The baby had been still for hours, and panic clawed at her throat. Project Genesis was designed to create the perfect human specimen: enhanced intelligence, disease resistance, extended lifespan. But there was always one flaw: reproductive viability. The genetic changes made natural pregnancy nearly impossible, and when it did occur, the fetal development was— Elena paused, choosing her words carefully. "Incompatible with life." Maya felt the world tilting. "How many of us are there?" "Were. You're the last surviving clone. The others—" Elena gestured to the photographs. "They all came here eventually, drawn by biological imperatives they couldn't understand, looking for answers about why their pregnancies were failing, and you just let them die? I've spent 30 years trying to save them, to save you." Elena moved to one of the machines, its screen flickering to life. "But I think I finally have a solution. The question is whether you trust me enough to try it." Maya stared at this woman who shared her face but aged by decades. Outside, wind rustled through the pines, and somewhere in the distance, she heard the sound of approaching vehicles. The metallic tang of rust and decay hit Elena's nostrils as she climbed the 3 corroded steps into the bus. Her hand gripped the door frame, knuckles white against the peeling yellow paint. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her apprehension. Elena lowered herself carefully onto the first seat, her swollen belly making even simple movements awkward. She pulled out her phone again, hoping desperately for even a single bar of service, but the screen remained stubbornly blank in the upper corner. The battery showed 15%. "Okay, baby," she whispered. placing both hands on her stomach. "We're going to be fine. Someone will come looking for this road eventually." The lie tasted bitter. She'd left the main highway over an hour ago, following what she'd thought was a shortcut the GPS had suggested before losing signal. Now she couldn't even remember which direction she'd come from. The winding mountain roads all looked the same, endless pine trees and granite outcroppings that seemed to mock her predicament. A sudden cramp seized her lower back, sharp enough to make her gasp. She breathed through it, counting slowly to 10 as Dr. Martinez had taught her. False alarm. It had to be. She wasn't due for another 3 weeks, and first babies were usually late anyway. Everyone said so. As the pain subsided, Elena forced herself to take stock of her surroundings more carefully. The bus was old, probably from the 70s based on the design, but it hadn't been abandoned carelessly. The windows were intact, and though dust covered everything, there was an odd sense of preservation about the space. She noticed a small pile of items on one of the seats midway down the aisle, a thermos, some kind of logbook, and what looked like a radio. Her pulse quickened. If someone had left supplies here recently, maybe they'd return. Elena made her way down the narrow aisle, using the seatbacks for support. The thermos was stainless steel, dented but serviceable. She unscrewed the cap and caught the faint scent of coffee, though the container was empty. The radio was a small handheld device, its antenna extended. She pressed the power button, but nothing happened. Dead battery. The logbook was more interesting. Bound in cracked leather, its pages were filled with handwritten entries in blue ink. Elena flipped to the most recent page and felt her breath catch. Weather clear. No contact from base camp. Day 847 of observation. Subject remains unaware. The date at the top of the page was from 6 months ago. Elena's hands trembled as she flipped back through the entries. Page after page of similar notations, stretching back nearly 3 years. References to the subject and base camp and maintaining distance. Some entries included detailed descriptions of weather patterns and wildlife movements, but others were more cryptic. Subject visited Dr. Chen again today, still asking questions about the procedure. Base camp confirms continuation of protocol. Subject must not be compromised. New complications detected. Subject may be developing resistance to the treatment. The words blurred as another contraction gripped Elena's abdomen, stronger this time. She doubled over, gripping the logbook so tightly that her fingernails dug crescents into the leather cover. This pain was different, deeper, more insistent. When it passed, she was breathing hard. She flipped desperately through more pages, searching for anything that might explain what she'd stumbled into. The handwriting was neat, clinical, like medical notes. Near the back of the book, she found a section that made her blood run cold. Subject's pregnancy proceeding normally despite interventions. Fetal development shows expected anomalies consistent with the enhancement protocol. Delivery anticipated within optimal window. Elena's vision went dark around the edges. She sank onto the nearest seat, the logbook falling open in her lap. Enhancement protocol. Fetal anomalies. How could someone be writing about a pregnancy when she'd never seen this book before in her life? Another contraction hit, and this time Elena couldn't suppress a cry of pain. The baby was coming. There was no denying it now, but the timing made no sense. She'd been so careful about her due date, had tracked everything meticulously. Unless her due date had been wrong from the beginning. Unless someone had been lying to her. With shaking fingers, she pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Dr. Martinez's number. No signal, but maybe she could get higher up the mountain or find a clearing. A sound outside made her freeze. Footsteps on gravel, slow and deliberate. Someone was approaching the bus. Elena clutched the logbook to her chest and held her breath, listening as the footsteps grew closer. The metallic tang of blood filled Elena's mouth as she bit down on her lip, fighting back another wave of nausea. The pregnancy had been merciless these past weeks, but something about the stale air inside the bus made everything worse. She pressed her palm against the grimy window, trying to steady herself as she surveyed the abandoned vehicle more carefully. Rows of torn vinyl seats stretched before her, their yellow foam innards spilling out like infected wounds. Graffiti covered every available surface, some crude, some artistic, all telling stories of people who had passed through this metal tomb before her. But it was what lay scattered across the floor that made her stomach clench with something beyond morning sickness. Children's belongings, a pink backpack with cartoon unicorns, a single sneaker small enough to belong to a 6-year-old, a tablet computer, its screen spider-webbed with cracks but somehow still glowing with a faint blue light. Elena's hand instinctively moved to her belly. 6 months along, and already she could feel the baby responding to her elevated heart rate with restless kicks. She should leave. Every rational part of her mind screamed at her to turn around, climb back down that embankment, and continue her desperate journey to the clinic in Millfield. Instead, she found herself moving deeper into the bus. The driver's seat was empty, but the key still dangled from the ignition. Strange. She peered through the windshield and saw nothing but an endless wall of pine trees, their branches so thick they blocked out most of the afternoon sun. How had this bus even gotten here? There was no road wide enough for a vehicle this size, no clear path through the forest. A sound from the back of the bus made her freeze, a soft electronic beeping, rhythmic and insistent. Elena's pulse quickened as she realized it was coming from beyond the emergency exit door, which stood slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of artificial light that had nothing to do with the dying day outside. She should run. Dr. Morrison's words echoed in her memory. "We need to operate within the week, Elena. The longer we wait, the more dangerous this becomes for both you and the baby." The rare blood condition that threatened her pregnancy didn't care about mysterious abandoned buses or her curiosity about missing children. But as she started toward the front exit, her foot caught on something metallic. Looking down, she saw a small nameplate that had fallen from somewhere above, Sacred Heart Elementary School District. Below it, barely visible in the dim light, were drops of something dark that definitely wasn't rust. The beeping from the back of the bus grew more insistent. Elena's hands shook as she pulled out her phone, hoping for enough signal to call for help. The screen showed no bars, but something else made her breath catch. The date. According to her phone, it was still Tuesday, October 15th. But she'd been walking since yesterday morning, had slept rough in the woods, and by all accounts it should be Wednesday. Unless she'd lost more time than she thought. Unless whatever medication Dr. Morrison had given her for the pain was affecting her more than he'd admitted. The baby kicked hard, as if responding to her confusion, and Elena gasped. In that moment of distraction she heard it clearly, voices coming from behind the emergency exit. Low, urgent, adult voices mixed with something that might have been crying. Her rational mind catalogued the impossibilities. A school bus in an impossible location, electronics still functioning after what appeared to be months of abandonment, voices where there should be only wilderness. But her desperate heart latched onto a different possibility entirely. What if this wasn't abandoned? What if someone here could help her? The blood condition that threatened her pregnancy was so rare that Dr. Morrison had been forced to reach out to specialists across the country. "We're dealing with something I've never seen before," he'd admitted during their last appointment. "Your blood type, the protein markers. It's like you're a medical anomaly." Elena's adoptive parents had died when she was 20, taking with them any knowledge of her biological family's medical history. She'd grown up knowing nothing about her genetic background, and now that ignorance might cost her everything. As she moved toward the back of the bus, stepping carefully around the scattered belongings, she noticed something else that made her pulse race. Posted near the emergency exit was a faded bulletin board, and pinned to it were dozens of photographs. School pictures, family snapshots, candid shots of children playing. And there, in the bottom right corner, was a photograph that made Elena's world tilt on its axis. A little girl with dark hair and serious eyes, standing next to a woman who shared Elena's distinctive facial structure. The resemblance was unmistakable, undeniable. Beneath the photo, in careful handwriting, someone had written, Elena Morrison, age 7. The beeping from beyond the emergency exit suddenly stopped, plunging the bus into an oppressive silence that seemed to press against her eardrums. The emergency brake released with a pneumatic hiss that made Elena's heart skip. She hadn't touched anything. The bus was moving on its own, rolling slowly down the mountain road with a mechanical precision that defied logic. Her hands flew to the steering wheel, but it turned smoothly under her grip as if guided by an invisible driver. Through the windshield, she watched the narrow road curve ahead, flanked by towering pines and steep drop-offs. The bus navigated each turn with an eerie confidence, its headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. Elena's medical bag sat forgotten on the dashboard as she gripped the wheel, feeling utterly powerless despite her hands being in position to control their direction. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her fear. She pressed a palm to her belly, whispering reassurances she didn't believe herself. The contractions had stopped completely, which should have been a relief, but instead felt ominous, as if her body was waiting for something to happen. "What do you want?" she whispered to the empty bus, feeling foolish but desperate for answers. The only response was the steady hum of the engine and the soft whoosh of air through the ventilation system. 20 minutes passed before the bus began to slow. Elena watched in fascination and terror as it pulled into what appeared to be an abandoned rest stop, complete with weathered picnic tables and a crumbling stone building that might have once housed restrooms. The headlights illuminated a wooden sign so faded she could barely make out the words, Mountain View Research Station, 1987. The engine died with mechanical finality. Elena sat in the sudden silence, her pulse thundering in her ears. Through the windows she could see the research station building more clearly now. It was larger than she'd first thought, extending back into the trees with multiple wings and what looked like observation towers. Vines had claimed most of the exterior walls, but the structure itself appeared sound. She tried the door handle, half expecting it to be locked, but it opened easily. The mountain air was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and something else, something antiseptic and clinical that reminded her of hospitals. Elena grabbed her medical bag and stepped down from the bus, her feet crunching on gravel that hadn't seen maintenance in decades. The front door of the research station stood slightly ajar, darkness visible beyond the threshold. Elena approached cautiously, using her phone's flashlight to illuminate the entrance. A brass plaque beside the door read, Montana Genetic Research Initiative, Dr. Sarah Chen, Director. The name hit her like a physical blow. Sarah Chen, the name written in her mother's journal, the woman whose research papers had been hidden in that safety deposit box. Elena's hands shook as she pushed the door open wider. The interior was surprisingly well preserved. Dust motes danced in her phone's beam as she moved through what appeared to be a reception area. Filing cabinets lined the walls, and a receptionist's desk sat positioned to greet visitors who hadn't come in over 30 years. Everything was neat, organized, as if the staff had simply stepped out for lunch and never returned. Elena moved deeper into the building, following a corridor lined with offices and laboratories. Through open doorways, she glimpsed equipment covered in sheets, computers that were cutting edge for their time but looked primitive now, and walls covered with charts and graphs she couldn't decipher in the dim light. At the end of the corridor, she found what must have been Dr. Chen's office. Unlike the other rooms, this one showed signs of hasty departure, papers scattered across the desk, drawers pulled open, a coffee cup sitting beside a keyboard with a ring of mold around its rim. Elena set her medical bag down and began examining the papers on the desk. Most were covered in technical jargon she couldn't follow, but one document made her blood run cold. It was a list of names, dates, and locations. Her eye caught on an entry halfway down the page, Subject 23, Margaret Walsh, implantation successful, tracking required. Margaret Walsh, her mother's maiden name. With trembling fingers, Elena picked up the paper and read more carefully. The date listed was 9 months before her own birth. The location was the small town where her mother had lived before moving to Portland, and at the bottom of the page, in handwritten notes, she found words that made her knees buckle: genetic modification stable, subject carrying enhanced embryo, monitor for transgenerational effects. Elena sank into Dr. Chen's chair, the paper fluttering from her nerveless fingers. Enhanced embryo, genetic modification. The clinical language couldn't mask the implications. Her mother had been part of some kind of experiment, which meant Elena herself was. Another contraction gripped her, stronger than before, and she doubled over with a gasp. But this time, she noticed something impossible. As the pain peaked, every piece of electronic equipment in the office flickered to life for exactly 3 seconds before dying again. The baby wasn't just coming early. The baby was coming home. The photograph trembled in Elena's hands as she studied the faces staring back at her. The woman in the center bore an unmistakable resemblance. The same dark eyes, the same delicate bone structure that Elena saw in mirrors. But it was the man beside her that made Elena's breath catch. She knew that face, though she'd only seen it in old newspaper clippings her adoptive mother had reluctantly shared years ago. Dr. Marcus Holloway, the fertility specialist who had supposedly helped her birth mother conceive before disappearing under a cloud of controversy. A sharp pain shot through Elena's abdomen, forcing her to double over. The contractions were getting stronger, more frequent. She needed to get off this mountain, needed medical attention, but her legs felt rooted to the spot. The photograph fluttered to the floor as she gripped the edge of the desk. When the pain subsided, she noticed something else, a stack of medical files tucked behind where the photograph had been. Her hands shook as she pulled them free, scanning the patient names with growing horror. Sarah Chen, Maria Rodriguez, Amanda Foster. Name after name of women, each file marked with the same notation: Project Genesis, Phase 2. Elena's own name was at the bottom of the stack. The file was thick, filled with documents dating back 24 years. Test results, genetic screenings, progress reports written in clinical language that made her skin crawl. But it was the final page that made her knees give out completely. Subject E. Morrison shows successful integration of modified genetic material. Pregnancy progressing normally. Recommend immediate extraction upon delivery for Phase 3 implementation. The date was from last week. They knew. Somehow, whoever had conducted these experiments, they knew about her pregnancy. They knew where she was. The realization hit her like ice water, her car trouble, being stranded on this particular road, finding this specific bus. None of it was coincidence. Another contraction gripped her, stronger than before, and she cried out. The sound echoed through the empty bus, seeming to mock her isolation. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The baby was coming whether she was ready or not. The door was stuck, warped by years of weather and neglect. Elena threw her shoulder against it as the engine sounds grew closer. On the third attempt, it gave way with a screech of protest, and she tumbled out into the cold mountain air. The forest pressed in around her, dense with shadows and the smell of pine. Elena could hear voices now, multiple people calling her name with false concern. They were searching the front of the bus first, buying her precious minutes. She pushed deeper into the trees, branches catching at her clothes and hair. Each step sent jolts of pain through her body as the contractions intensified. Behind her, she heard someone curse as they discovered the open emergency door. "She can't have gone far," a man's voice called out. "Not in her condition." A memory surfaced unbidden, her adoptive mother's face when Elena had asked about her birth parents, the way she'd looked away, the subtle tension in her shoulders. "Some things are better left buried, sweetheart," she'd said. "Your birth mother loved you enough to give you a normal life." Normal. Elena almost laughed at the irony. Nothing about this was normal. Nothing about her life had ever been normal, she realized. The strange dreams she'd had as a child, the way she'd always healed faster than other kids, the doctors who'd taken such intense interest in her development. Another contraction seized her, and she bit down on her sleeve to muffle her cry. The baby was coming soon, and she was alone in the wilderness with people hunting her like an animal, people who had been planning this moment for decades. The beam of a flashlight swept dangerously close to her hiding spot. Elena held her breath as footsteps crunched through the underbrush nearby. A woman's voice, eerily calm, spoke into what sounded like a radio. "Thermal imaging shows her about 50 yards northeast of your position. She's stationary, probably in labor. Move to intercept, but approach carefully. We need both subjects alive and healthy." Both subjects. They weren't just after Elena. They wanted her baby too. As the footsteps moved away, Elena forced herself to keep moving deeper into the forest. Whatever Project Genesis was, whatever they'd done to her, she wouldn't let them have her child. Not without a fight. The photograph trembled in Maya's hands as she studied the face staring back at her, a face that could have been her own reflection 25 years ago. The woman in the lab coat stood beside a younger Dr. Reeves, both smiling at the camera with the casual confidence of people who believed they were changing the world. "Dr. Elena Vasquez," Maya whispered, reading the faded nameplate visible in the background. The name felt foreign on her tongue, yet something deep in her chest recognized it like an echo of a half-remembered song. Thunder crashed overhead, and rain began pelting the bus windows with increasing fury. Maya barely noticed. She was too busy rifling through the remaining files, her heart hammering as pieces of a puzzle she didn't even know existed began falling into place. "No," she breathed, shaking her head violently. "This is impossible." But the evidence was irrefutable. Her adoption records from the Riverside Children's Home, the same facility mentioned repeatedly in these files. Blood type, genetic markers, even a small birthmark on her left shoulder that she'd always assumed was natural, all catalogued here with scientific precision. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Maya gasped as a sharp pain shot through her abdomen. She pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the child's restless movements, and suddenly understood why she'd been drawn to this place, why the coordinates had felt like destiny rather than coincidence. Her phone buzzed. A text from David: "Storm getting worse. Roads flooding. Can't reach you until morning. Please be safe." Maya stared at the message, then at the files scattered around her. Safe. The word felt laughable now. How could she ever feel safe again when everything she thought she knew about herself was a lie? She picked up another document, a progress report dated just weeks before the Riverside incident. Dr. Reeves's handwriting was cramped but legible. Subject 23 is showing remarkable adaptation to genetic modifications. Enhanced immune system, accelerated healing, improved cellular regeneration. Dr. Vasquez insists on keeping the child despite protocol violations. Recommend immediate termination of both subjects. Maya's blood turned to ice. Termination. They had planned to kill her mother, her real mother, and her too. A new file caught her attention, this one marked with Elena Vasquez's own handwriting. Personal log, day 847 of Project Genesis. Maya opened it with shaking fingers. "I can't let them take her. Maya is not just another test subject. She's my daughter, and what we've done to her, what we've made her capable of, it terrifies me. The genetic modifications were supposed to create the perfect human, immune to disease, capable of incredible healing, but at what cost? The other children, God help me, what happened to the other children? The bus crash wasn't an accident," she read in her mother's final entry. "They found us. Elena tried to get me out, tried to save the other survivors, but there wasn't time. She told me to run, to find the emergency cache hidden in grid coordinates 41.2033 degree N, 111.9678 degree. Said someday I might need to know the truth about what I am." Maya's hands flew to her phone, pulling up the GPS coordinates. They matched exactly where she sat now. But it was the final line that made her blood run cold. "The modifications aren't just in me, they're in my DNA. Any children I have will inherit them, possibly in amplified form. Maya can never know. She can never have children. The risk is too great." The paper slipped from Maya's numb fingers as another contraction gripped her, stronger than before. She doubled over, gasping as her enhanced senses suddenly kicked into overdrive. She could hear David's truck struggling through the flooding valley miles below, could smell the ozone-charged air through the bus's sealed windows, could feel her baby's heartbeat as clearly as her own. Outside, lightning illuminated the mountainside, and in that brief flash of brilliance, Maya saw them, dark shapes moving between the trees, approaching the bus with deliberate predatory precision. Her enhanced vision caught details that should have been impossible in the darkness. Tactical gear, weapons, faces she recognized from the old Riverside files. Dr. Reeves stepped into view, 25 years older but unmistakably the same man who had ordered her mother's death. He smiled up at the bus windows, and Maya realized with growing horror that this had never been about finding refuge from the storm. It had been a trap, and she had walked right into it. The journal's pages crackled like autumn leaves as Sarah turned them with trembling fingers. Each entry revealed another piece of a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to complete. The handwriting was neat, methodical, the kind that belonged to someone who chose their words carefully. Day 127, the morning sickness has finally subsided. Dr. Chen says the baby is developing normally despite the circumstances. I try not to think about what normal means anymore. Nothing about this pregnancy has been normal since I agreed to participate. Sarah's breath caught. The date was from 28 years ago, the same year she was born. Day 134, they moved me to a different facility today. More comfortable, they said. The other women here look as confused as I feel. We're not allowed to speak to each other about our pregnancies, but I can see the questions in their eyes. The same questions that keep me awake at night. The pages grew more desperate as the entries continued. References to injections, to doctors with foreign accents, to promises that their children would be special in ways the woman couldn't yet understand. Sarah found herself holding her breath as she read, her free hand instinctively moving to her own swollen belly. Day 156, I've been having the dreams again, always the same. A bus driving through mountains, children's voices singing lullabies I've never heard before. Dr. Chen says it's normal for pregnant women to have vivid dreams, but these feel like memories of something that hasn't happened yet. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. She looked up from the journal to the very bus the woman had dreamed about decades before her birth. The coincidence felt too deliberate, too precise to be random. Day 167. I overheard two nurses talking about the next generation. They mentioned something called Project Aurora. When I asked Dr. Chen about it, his face went white. He transferred to a different department the next day. I haven't seen him since. Project Aurora. Sarah repeated the name silently, committing it to memory. Whatever it was, it connected this place to her own mysterious past, and possibly to her unborn child's future. The journal entries grew shorter and more frantic as the birth approached. The woman, who never mentioned her own name, wrote about strange tests, about other pregnant women disappearing in the night, about doctors who spoke in whispers and took copious notes about every aspect of their conditions. Day 189, they told me my baby died during birth. They wouldn't let me see the body, wouldn't let me hold her, even for a moment, but I heard her cry. I know I did. A strong, healthy cry that cut through all their lies. Sarah's vision blurred. The words on the page seemed to pulse with the rhythm of her own heartbeat. Day 190, I'm writing this in secret. They think I'm sedated, but I've been hiding the pills. Tonight, I'm going to find out what really happened to my daughter. If they've taken her, if she's alive somewhere in this facility, I'll find her. The entries stopped there. The remaining pages were blank except for a loose photograph tucked between them. Sarah's hands shook as she pulled it free. The photo showed a young woman, barely more than a girl, with dark hair and eyes that held the same determined spark Sarah recognized from her own mirror. But it was the baby in the woman's arms that made Sarah's world tilt on its axis. The infant had a distinctive birthmark on her left shoulder, shaped like a crescent moon. The same birthmark Sarah had carried her entire life. "No," she whispered. But the evidence was undeniable. The woman in the photograph looked exactly like Sarah had at 19, and the baby— Footsteps crunched on gravel outside the bus, heavy, deliberate steps that sent panic shooting through Sarah's nervous system. She quickly stuffed the journal and photograph into her jacket, her mind reeling from the implications of what she'd discovered. The footsteps stopped just outside the bus door. Sarah held her breath, pressing herself against the wall and praying that whoever was out there would move on, but the silence stretched too long, too purposefully, like a predator waiting for prey to reveal itself. A shadow fell across the dirty windows, then another. Sarah realized with growing horror that she was surrounded. Sarah Morrison. The voice was male, cultured, with the faint accent she remembered from the journal entries. "We know you're in there. There's no point in hiding." Her baby kicked frantically, as if sensing the danger. Sarah placed both hands on her belly, trying to calm the movement while her mind raced through impossible options. The back emergency exit was probably her only chance, but in her condition, she couldn't move quickly enough to outrun healthy adults. "We're not here to hurt you," the voice continued, though something in its tone suggested otherwise. "We just want to talk. About your mother. About why she brought you here." The photographs scattered across the bus floor like fallen leaves, each one a fragment of a life Elena had never known she'd lived. Her hands trembled as she gathered them, the flashlight beam dancing erratically across faces that were both foreign and achingly familiar. There she was at maybe 5 years old, gap-toothed and grinning beside a woman who wasn't her mother. At least not the mother who had raised her. The woman in the photo had Elena's same dark eyes, the same stubborn jawline that Elena now unconsciously touched. In another picture, she stood between two adults outside a small house with peeling blue paint, mountains rising behind them like silent guardians. "This isn't possible," she whispered to the empty bus, but her voice carried no conviction. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable in its clarity. Her adoptive parents. The word felt foreign in her mind, like trying on clothes that didn't fit. Between the certificates, a letter written in careful script that had faded to pale blue over the years. The paper was soft with age, worn thin at the creases where it had been folded and unfolded countless times. "My dearest Elena, you're reading this, then you've found what I've been hiding for so many years. I don't know if you'll understand or if you'll ever forgive me, but I need you to know the truth about where you came from and why I had to let you go. You were born in Shadow Creek, not in Denver like your parents, your adoptive parents, told you. This bus, this place, it was our home for a while when I was running from your father. Not running because I didn't love him, but because I loved you more." The handwriting became more hurried, desperate, as if the writer had been racing against time. "There's something in our bloodline, Elena. Something that skips generations. Something that makes pregnancy dangerous for our family. Your grandmother died giving birth to me. Her mother before that. I nearly lost you twice before you were born, and the doctors said another pregnancy would kill me." Elena's hand moved instinctively to her belly, where the baby seemed to respond with a flutter of movement. Dr. Martinez's warnings echoed in her memory. Complications, risks, the statistical improbability of carrying to term. But there's also something else, something protective. The old woman in town, Maria Santos, she knew things, ancient things. She helped me through your birth with remedies that doctors would laugh at, but they worked. She said the knowledge had to be passed down, mother to daughter, but only when the time was right. Elena turned the page, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "I've hidden things for you in this place. Maria's recipes, her instructions, everything she taught me about safe delivery for women like us. But more than that, I've hidden myself. I couldn't bear to watch you grow up from a distance, couldn't trust myself not to interfere, so I stayed away, but I made sure this place would be here if you ever needed it." The wind outside had picked up, rattling the bus windows with ghostly fingers. Elena pulled her jacket tighter, feeling suddenly cold despite the stifling air inside. Look under the driver's seat, behind the panel. Everything you need is there. Trust Maria's wisdom. She delivered 3 generations of our family safely when medical science said it was impossible. Elena crawled toward the front of the bus, her flashlight beam revealing loose screws in the panel behind the driver's seat. Her fingers found purchase, and the metal came away easily, as if it had been opened recently. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was another bundle. Jars filled with dried herbs she couldn't identify, their labels written in Spanish. A leather journal, its pages covered with detailed drawings of plants and careful measurements, and at the bottom, a small wooden box containing what looked like jewelry, but not the decorative kind. These pieces were clearly ceremonial, carved with symbols that seemed to pulse in the uncertain light. A photograph was tucked inside the journal's cover, the same woman from the scattered pictures, but older now, standing beside an elderly Hispanic woman with knowing eyes and gentle hands. On the back, in the same careful script, Elena and Maria, 1975. The last lesson, Elena's mother. Her real mother, who had lived and died while Elena grew up believing herself an only child of parents who had loved her, but never quite understood her restless spirit, her need to wander, her dreams of mountains she'd never seen. The baby kicked sharply, and Elena gasped, the journal slipping from her hands as a familiar pain lanced through her abdomen. The photograph trembled in Sarah's hands as she stared at the face that could have been her own reflection. The woman in the picture had the same dark hair, the same angular jawline, the same distinctive scar above her left eyebrow that Sarah had carried since childhood, a mark she'd always been told came from falling off a swing when she was 3. But this woman wasn't her. The timestamp on the photograph read 1987, 2 years before Sarah was born. Elena. The name felt foreign and familiar all at once, like a word on the tip of her tongue that she couldn't quite grasp. Sarah's maiden name was Henderson. She'd never heard of any Vasquez in her family, never seen this photograph before in her life. Yet the resemblance was undeniable, impossible. She reached for the manila envelope again, her hands shaking as she pulled out more documents. A birth certificate, yellowed with age, bearing Elena's name and a date that would make her 45 now. A marriage license from 1988, and then, at the bottom of the pile, something that made Sarah's blood run cold. A death certificate. Elena Vasquez, deceased at age 20, cause of death listed as complications during childbirth. The paper slipped from Sarah's fingers as a contraction gripped her abdomen, stronger than the ones before. She doubled over, breathing hard, waiting for it to pass. When it did, she found herself staring at the scattered documents with new eyes, pieces of a puzzle she didn't want to solve. Elena had died giving birth in 1989, the same year Sarah was born. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Where are you? The police were here asking questions about the clinic. Call me." Sarah stared at the message, her mind reeling. Police at the clinic where she worked, where Dr. Reeves had been so insistent about her staying there for the birth. The same Dr. Reeves who had known exactly where to find this bus, who had seemed so familiar with the mountain roads. Another contraction hit, this one lasting nearly a minute. They were getting closer together. She needed to get down the mountain, needed to get to a hospital, but first she had to understand what she'd stumbled into. She gathered the documents and photographs, stuffing them into her jacket pocket, and made her way to the front of the bus. The driver's area was separated from the main compartment by a metal partition, and when she peered through the opening, she saw something that made her gasp. A logbook lay open on the dashboard, pages upon pages of entries dating back decades. She climbed into the driver's seat, ignoring the protest from her swollen belly, and began to read. Names, dates, locations. Dozens of them. Young women, most between 16 and 25, all marked with cryptic notations. Some entries had red X's beside them, others had question marks, and some, like Elena Vasquez's entry, had a small symbol that looked like a baby's footprint. Sarah's finger traced down the columns until she found what she was looking for. There, in careful handwriting dated just 3 months ago, was her own name, Sarah Henderson, age 30, due October. Suitable candidate. Confirmed placement arranged. The logbook fell from her hands as another contraction seized her, this one so intense she cried out. When it passed, she was breathing hard, sweat beading on her forehead despite the mountain chill. The contractions were less than 10 minutes apart now. She fumbled for her phone and dialed Marcus's number with shaking fingers. It went straight to voicemail. She tried again, same result. Either he wasn't answering or the signal was too weak up here. A sound outside made her freeze. Footsteps on gravel, slow and deliberate. Someone was approaching the bus. Sarah ducked down in the driver's seat, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the grimy windshield, she could see a figure moving through the trees, a man in a dark jacket walking purposefully toward the bus. Even from this distance, she recognized the measured gait, the slight stoop of the shoulders. Dr. Reeves. He was carrying something in his hands, something that glinted in the afternoon light. As he drew closer, she could see it was a medical bag, the kind used for house calls, the kind that might contain everything needed to deliver a baby in an isolated location. Sarah's blood turned to ice as the pieces finally clicked into place. The clinic's insistence that she stay local for the birth. Dr. Reeves's knowledge of these mountain roads, the logbook full of names, the documents belonging to a woman who looked exactly like her. She wasn't here by accident. This wasn't a coincidence. This was exactly where they'd wanted her to end up. The generator hummed to life with a reluctant cough, flooding the bus with harsh fluorescent light that made Maya shield her eyes. As her vision adjusted, she found herself staring at walls lined with monitors, medical equipment, and filing cabinets that hadn't been visible in the darkness. This wasn't just an abandoned bus, it was a mobile laboratory. Her breath caught as she recognized some of the equipment. Ultrasound machines, centrifuges, refrigeration units for storing biological samples. The setup was sophisticated, expensive, and completely out of place in these remote mountains. A manila folder lay open on the central workstation, as if someone had been reading it moments before fleeing. Maya approached cautiously, her wet clothes clinging uncomfortably to her skin. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, sensing her tension. The name on the folder made her blood freeze. Maya Chen, subject 47. With trembling fingers, she opened the file. The first page contained her photograph, taken without her knowledge outside her apartment in Portland. Below it, a detailed medical history that was impossibly accurate. Every doctor's visit, every prescription, even the exact date of her last menstrual period before becoming pregnant. She flipped through pages of genetic test results, hormone-level charts, and ultrasound images of her baby that she'd never seen before. Someone had been monitoring her pregnancy with clinical precision, documenting everything from the fetus's growth rate to her own changing body chemistry. A handwritten note in the margin caught her attention. Accelerated development confirmed. Neural activity 40% above baseline. Proceed to phase 3. Maya's legs gave out, and she collapsed into the desk chair. The bus swayed slightly under her weight, creaking in the wind that had picked up outside. Rain drummed harder against the windows, trapping her in this nightmare of revelation. She forced herself to keep reading. The deeper she went into the file, the more her world unraveled. There were records of her parents' medical histories going back 3 generations, genetic markers highlighted in yellow, and compatibility charts she didn't understand but instinctively feared. A section labeled Breeding Program, Generation 4, made bile rise in her throat. Her name appeared on a family tree alongside dozens of others, all connected by lines and numbers that reduced human lives to data points. At the bottom of the chart, her baby was listed as primary candidate, enhanced genome integration. The sound of an engine in the distance made her freeze. Headlights swept across the bus windows as a vehicle climbed the mountain road. Maya quickly gathered the most important documents from her file, stuffing them into her jacket, then switched off the generator. The bus plunged back into darkness just as the engine sounds grew closer. She pressed herself against the window, peering through the rain-streaked glass. A black SUV with tinted windows had stopped 50 yards away. Two figures emerged, their flashlight beams cutting through the storm as they approached the bus. Maya's mind raced through her options. The back emergency exit was her only chance, but it would put her in the open mountain terrain in a storm, pregnant and exhausted. Still, staying meant capture by whoever had been conducting experiments on her and her unborn child. She grabbed a waterproof bag from one of the equipment lockers and shoved the stolen documents inside, along with a small handheld device she didn't recognize but looked important. The baby shifted restlessly, as if sensing the danger. The footsteps outside grew closer. Male voices carried on the wind, though she couldn't make out words over the storm. One of them was giving orders, his tone urgent and angry. Maya crept toward the rear of the bus, her bare feet silent on the metal flooring. The emergency exit handle was stiff with rust, and she had to put her full weight behind it to get it to turn. The door opened with a small squeak that sounded deafening in the confined space. Cold mountain air and driving rain hit her immediately. She squeezed through the narrow opening just as the main bus door hissed open at the front. Light flooded the interior behind her as someone stepped inside. "The generator's still warm," a voice called out. "She was here recently." Maya dropped to the muddy ground and crawled under the bus, the waterproof bag clutched against her chest. Her pregnant belly made movement awkward, and sharp rocks cut into her knees and palms. Above her, heavy boots moved through the bus, searching. "Sir, we found her file. It's been disturbed. What's missing?" "Hard to tell. Looks like she took some of the documentation." A string of curses echoed through the bus. Maya had never heard the voice before, but something about its cadence triggered a memory she couldn't quite grasp. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and she pressed her hand to her belly, silently pleading for stillness. "Expand the search perimeter. She's pregnant and on foot. She can't have gotten far. And contact Dr. Reeves. Tell him we may need to accelerate the timeline." The name hit Maya like a physical blow. Dr. Reeves had been her mother's obstetrician 30 years ago. The photograph trembled in Maya's hands as she studied the faces staring back at her. Her mother, young and radiant, stood beside a man Maya had never seen before, tall, dark-haired, with kind eyes that seemed hauntingly familiar. Between them, a toddler with Maya's exact features clutched a stuffed rabbit. "That's impossible," she whispered. But even as the words left her lips, fragments of memory began surfacing like debris from a shipwreck. The scent of pine needles, a woman's voice singing lullabies, strong arms lifting her high into mountain air. Dr. Reeves moved closer, his expression grave. "Your mother brought you here when you were barely 2 years old. She was terrified, desperate. Said she'd discovered something about the Helix project that put you both in danger." Maya's legs gave out, and she sank onto the dusty bus seat. The baby kicked frantically, as if sensing her distress. "But my mother died in a car accident when I was 3. I lived with my grandmother after that. Sarah Chen staged that accident," Dr. Reeves said softly. "She had help from people within the program who'd grown conscience-stricken about what they were doing to the children. Your grandmother was part of the network. She knew the truth but was sworn to secrecy to protect you." The world tilted sideways. Everything Maya thought she knew about her life crumbled like ancient paper. "Then who is this man in the photograph?" "Your biological father, Dr. Marcus Webb, one of the original Helix researchers. He fell in love with your mother during the early trials before either of them understood the full scope of what they were creating." Dr. Reeves paused, studying her face. "He died trying to expose the program. Made it look like a laboratory accident, but we all knew better." Maya pressed her palm against her belly, feeling the steady rhythm of her baby's heartbeat. "And the genetic modifications they made to me, they're already in my child, aren't they? The enhancements appear to be hereditary, yes, but Maya, you have to understand, your child represents something unprecedented. The first third-generation subject born outside the program's control. They've been searching for you for 30 years. A cold dread settled in her chest. How did they find me? Dr. Reeves pulled out a small device that looked like a modified cell phone. The screen showed a pulsing red dot. Biotracking. They've been monitoring unusual medical readings, enhanced reflexes, accelerated healing, metabolic anomalies. When you went to that clinic for prenatal care, you triggered their system. Maya thought of Dr. Harrison's odd questions, his insistence on additional blood work. The doctor who examined me, he was working for them? Most likely. The Helix Corporation has people embedded throughout the medical system. They've been patient, methodical, waiting for subjects like you to surface. He powered down the device. That's why your mother's message was so urgent. She knew they'd eventually find you. Outside, snow had begun falling harder, the wind rattling the bus windows. Maya stared at the photograph again, trying to reconcile this new reality with her memories. What did my mother discover that made her run? Dr. Reeves was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old guilt. Phase 3 of the Helix project wasn't about creating enhanced humans for military applications. That was just the cover story. The real goal was consciousness transfer, downloading minds into modified bodies that could live indefinitely. The implications hit Maya like a physical blow. They were creating vessels. Exactly. Bodies without fully developed consciousness that could be inhabited by others. The children weren't subjects. They were products. His hands clenched into fists. Your mother found the transfer protocols, discovered that every child in the program was destined to have their consciousness overwritten by wealthy clients seeking immortality. Maya felt sick. The baby's movements had grown more agitated, responding to her emotional turmoil. And now, they want my child for the same purpose. Worse, third-generation subjects are theoretically perfect vessels, all the enhancements without any of the psychological resistance we saw in earlier generations. Your baby could be worth billions on the black market. The snow continued falling, creating a white curtain around the bus. Maya realized with growing horror that they were being slowly buried, hidden from view. Dr. Reeves, how long have we been sitting here? He checked his watch, frowning. About 20 minutes. Why? Listen. In the distance, barely audible over the wind, came the sound of engines, multiple vehicles moving slowly up the mountain road. Maya's enhanced hearing picked up radio chatter, the crunch of boots on snow. They found us, she breathed. Dr. Reeves moved to the window, peering through the gathering darkness. Red and blue lights flickered between the trees, growing brighter. There's a back exit, he said urgently. We can slip out through the emergency door, but we'll have to move fast. Maya struggled to her feet, the photograph still clutched in her hand. Her mother's face smiled up at her, frozen in a moment of happiness before the nightmare began. She wasn't going to let history repeat itself. Lead the way, she said. The manila folder felt impossibly heavy in Maya's trembling hands as she sat cross-legged on the dusty bus floor. The generator hummed steadily outside, casting harsh shadows through the windows as evening approached. Each document she'd pulled from the hidden compartment seemed to unravel another thread of the life she thought she knew. Birth certificates, medical records, newspaper clippings, all bearing the name Sanctuary Hills Research Facility. All dated from the late 1980s, all connected to children who had simply vanished from public record after being treated there. Maya's breath caught as she found a photograph paper-clipped to a medical file. A young girl, maybe 4 years old, with dark hair and eyes that looked hauntingly familiar. The name written in neat handwriting across the bottom made her stomach lurch. Subject 47, Maya Chen. Her maiden name. Her face. This isn't possible, she whispered. But even as the words left her lips, fragmented memories began surfacing like bubbles in dark water. White hallways, the smell of antiseptic, a woman in a lab coat who called her special and chosen. She flipped through more pages with desperate urgency. The medical records detailed experimental gene therapy trials, something called Project Genesis. Children had been selected based on specific genetic markers, their DNA modified to enhance healing capabilities and disease resistance. The success rate was listed as 37%. Maya pressed her hand to her swollen belly, feeling the baby's restless movements. The timing of her pregnancy, the strange dreams, the way her morning sickness had suddenly vanished after finding this bus. It all began to make a terrible kind of sense. A loose sheet of paper fell from the folder, covered in Dr. Harrison's familiar handwriting. It was dated just 3 months ago. Maya's hands shook so violently she could barely hold the paper. They weren't just tracking her pregnancy. They had somehow caused it. The baby she carried wasn't just her child, it was the culmination of an experiment that had begun when she was barely old enough to remember. Another document caught her attention, this one bearing official government letterhead. A termination order for Project Genesis, dated 1992. The facility had been shut down, the research declared unethical and illegal. All subjects were to be relocated and given new identities, their memories suppressed through experimental psychological techniques. But the research hadn't ended. It had gone underground. Maya scrambled through the remaining papers, finding correspondence between Dr. Harrison and someone identified only as the coordinator. The letters detailed a long-term study tracking the modified children as they grew into adults, waiting to see if the genetic changes would pass to the next generation. The Chen subject has proven most promising, one letter read. Her enhanced immune system and accelerated healing abilities remained stable throughout adolescence. She has no conscious memory of the program. Recommend proceeding with conception protocol as planned. Maya's mind reeled. Her entire adult life, meeting David, falling in love, trying for years to get pregnant, then suddenly conceiving. Had it all been orchestrated? Had her choices ever truly been her own? She found David's name in the files, along with his genetic profile and psychological assessment. He was listed as selected paternal unit, deemed compatible for optimal offspring development. Even their love story had been a lie. The baby kicked forcefully, as if responding to her distress. Maya placed both hands on her belly, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, I didn't know." But beneath the horror and betrayal, something else was growing, a fierce, protective rage. These people had stolen her childhood, manipulated her entire life, and now they wanted to claim her child as their prize. She wouldn't let that happen. But Maya wasn't the same frightened woman who had stumbled onto this bus yesterday. She understood now why her body had been changing, why she felt stronger and more alert than ever before. The modifications they had made to her as a child were activating, triggered by the pregnancy. She was no longer just a victim of their experiment. She was their greatest success, and potentially their most dangerous threat. Maya shouldered her pack and moved toward the bus's rear exit, her enhanced senses already picking up the sound of boots on gravel, the whispered communications of the approaching team. They thought they were hunting a helpless, pregnant woman. They were about to discover how wrong they were. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Maya sat in the sterile waiting room, her hands trembling as she clutched the manila envelope Dr. Chen had given her. Inside were the test results that would either confirm her worst fears or provide the miracle she desperately needed. The hospital smelled of disinfectant and anxiety, a scent that seemed to seep into her very bones. Maya Caldwell? A nurse appeared at the doorway, her expression carefully neutral. "Dr. Morrison will see you now." Maya's legs felt unsteady as she followed the nurse down the hallway. Each step echoed her thundering heartbeat. Behind her, she could hear Marcus's footsteps, his presence both comforting and terrifying. He still didn't know the full truth about what she'd discovered on that bus, about the connection to her past that threatened to unravel everything. Dr. Morrison's office was warm compared to the waiting room, filled with family photos and medical diplomas that spoke of competence and care. The doctor herself was a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes that had clearly delivered both good news and heartbreak countless times. "Please, sit down," Dr. Morrison said, gesturing to the chairs across from her desk. Maya noticed how the doctor's gaze lingered on the envelope in her hands. "I understand you have some additional medical history that might be relevant to your case?" Maya's throat felt dry as sandpaper. I discovered some information about my biological family, medical records." She placed the envelope on the desk between them like a peace offering to an unpredictable god. Dr. Morrison opened the envelope carefully, her eyes scanning the documents Maya had found in that hidden compartment on the bus. The silence stretched unbearably long. Maya watched the doctor's face for any hint of what the papers revealed, but her expression remained professionally composed. "These are quite detailed," Dr. Morrison finally said. "Genetic markers, blood work, even some experimental treatment protocols from the 1990s. She looked up at Maya with new interest. "Where exactly did you obtain these?" Maya exchanged a glance with Marcus, whose jaw was tight with worry. "It's complicated. They belonged to my biological mother. I was adopted as an infant." "I see." Dr. Morrison returned her attention to the documents, cross-referencing them with Maya's recent test results on her computer screen. The clicking of the keyboard seemed amplified in the quiet room. "Maya, I need to ask you something important. Have you experienced any unusual symptoms during this pregnancy? Anything that seemed different from what you might expect?" The question sent a chill down Maya's spine. Different how? Enhanced healing, for instance, or resistance to certain medications, changes in your blood pressure or heart rate that don't follow normal patterns. Maya felt the room tilt slightly. She had noticed things, small things she'd attributed to pregnancy hormones or stress. The cut on her hand from the bus's broken window had healed remarkably quickly. Her blood pressure had been confusing the nurses, fluctuating in ways that defied explanation. "How did you know?" she whispered. Dr. Morrison leaned forward, her voice dropping to a more confidential tone. "Because according to these records, your biological mother was part of a research program, a study involving genetic modifications designed to enhance immune system function and cellular regeneration. The program was discontinued in 1998 amid ethical concerns." Marcus grabbed Maya's hand. "What does that mean for the baby?" "That's what we need to determine," Dr. Morrison said. "The good news is that your mother's genetic modifications appear to have been passed down to you, and they may actually be protecting your child from the condition we detected earlier. Your baby's development is showing signs of the same enhanced cellular repair mechanisms." Maya felt tears burning her eyes, but she couldn't tell if they were from relief or fear. Is that why someone was looking for those records? Why the bus was hidden in the mountains? Dr. Morrison's expression darkened. "There are pharmaceutical companies that would pay enormous sums for this kind of genetic information, people who would view you and your baby as valuable research subjects rather than human beings." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Maya, I believe someone has been tracking the families from that original research program. The question is whether they know you've found your mother's records." A cold dread settled in Maya's stomach as she remembered the figure she'd seen watching her house, the strange phone calls that had started after her trip to the mountains. "We need to get those records to someone we can trust," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I have contacts at the CDC," Dr. Morrison replied. "People who can ensure this information is used to help others, not exploit them. But Maya, until we can guarantee your safety, I think you should consider staying somewhere less predictable than your home." Maya nodded, her mind already racing through possibilities. The secret she'd uncovered was bigger than her own family's past. It was a key that could unlock treatments for countless others. But first, she had to make sure she and her baby survived long enough to see those treatments become reality. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Maya stared at the medical records scattered across Dr. Henley's desk. Each page felt like a piece of a puzzle she'd never wanted to solve, revealing a picture that made her stomach churn with something far worse than morning sickness. "Project Genesis," she whispered, her finger tracing the letterhead on one of the documents. "That's what they called it." Dr. Henley nodded grimly from behind his desk, his weathered hands clasped tightly together. Your mother was one of 12 women selected for the experimental treatment. All of them had been told their pregnancies were high risk, that without intervention, both mother and child would die. Maya's hand instinctively moved to her belly. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, facing the same impossible choice her mother had been given 28 years ago. But the treatment worked, didn't it? I'm here, I'm alive. You're alive, yes, but at what cost? Dr. Henley reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder. What I'm about to show you, it's going to be difficult to process. The first photograph made Maya's breath catch. It showed her mother, impossibly young, lying on a hospital bed with her swollen belly exposed. Electrodes were attached to her skin, connected to machines Maya didn't recognize. But it was her mother's eyes that haunted her, wide with fear, pleading with whoever was behind the camera. The serum they used wasn't just experimental, Dr. Henley continued. It was designed to alter genetic sequences, to create children with enhanced capabilities, stronger immune systems, higher intelligence, accelerated healing. They called you enhanced offspring. Maya flipped through more photographs, her hands trembling. Other women, other beds, all bearing the same expression of terror masked as hope. Enhanced how? Tell me, Maya, have you ever been seriously ill, broken a bone that healed unusually fast? Notice that you remember things with perfect clarity, or that you can sense things others can't. The questions hit her like physical blows. Her childhood suddenly made terrible sense, the way cuts and scrapes vanished overnight. How she'd never needed glasses despite reading constantly. The strange intuition that had led her to the bus in the first place. She'd always attributed these things to luck or good genes. There were side effects, Dr. Henley said softly. Psychological instability in some subjects, cellular deterioration in others. And then there was the matter of the second generation. Maya's blood ran cold. Second generation. Your children, Maya. The genetic modifications were designed to be hereditary, but the scientists didn't fully understand how the alterations would manifest in subsequent generations. Some children were born with severe deformities, others didn't survive past infancy. A few, he paused, studying her face, a few developed abilities that frightened even their creators. The room seemed to spin around her. Every kick from her unborn daughter suddenly felt ominous, every flutter a reminder that she was carrying something that might not be entirely human. Is that why they shut down the program? Why they abandoned the bus? Partially. But the real reason was Dr. Reeves himself. He discovered that the pharmaceutical company funding the research planned to weaponize the genetic modifications, create super soldiers, essentially. When he tried to expose them, they discredited him, destroyed his research, and scattered the participants. Maya thought of the desperate man she'd encountered in the bus, his manic insistence that he could save her daughter. But he kept working, didn't he? All these years he's been trying to perfect the serum, or trying to undo what he'd done. The guilt nearly destroyed him. Dr. Henley leaned forward, his expression intense. Maya, there's something else. The company that funded Project Genesis, they never really disappeared. They've been monitoring the first-generation subjects, waiting to see how their children would develop. A chill ran down Maya's spine. Monitoring how? Think about it. Your medical records, your genetic screening when you got pregnant, even your decision to come to these mountains. What if none of it was really your choice? The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. Her sudden move to the remote cabin, the hiking trail that had led her directly to the bus, even meeting James and getting pregnant. It all felt orchestrated now, like she'd been following a script written by invisible hands. They wanted me to find the bus, she breathed. They wanted me to find Dr. Reeves. Dr. Henley nodded. The question is why? What do they hope to gain from your daughter? Before Maya could respond, the lights flickered. Once, twice. Then the building plunged into darkness. In the sudden silence, she heard footsteps in the hallway outside. slow, deliberate, and definitely not belonging to any late-night medical staff. Dr. Henley's hand found hers across the desk, his grip surprisingly strong. "They know you're here," he whispered urgently. "We need to go, now." But as Maya stood, she felt a sharp pain shoot through her abdomen, followed by a warm wetness between her legs. Her daughter, it seemed, had chosen this moment to make her dramatic entrance into a world that had been waiting for her arrival for 28 years. The laboratory's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Sarah stared at the blood test results in Dr. Chen's trembling hands. The numbers swam before her eyes, but their meaning crystallized with terrifying clarity. Her genetic markers didn't just match the samples from the bus. They were identical to Subject 47, the only survivor of Project Genesis. "Impossible," she whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her swollen belly. "I would remember." Dr. Chen's weathered face crumpled with decades of suppressed guilt. Memory suppression was part of the protocol. You were only 8 years old when we extracted you from the program. Your adoptive parents were told you'd suffered trauma in a car accident that killed your biological family. The room tilted as Sarah gripped the examination table. Every fragment of her childhood that had never quite fit suddenly snapped into place. The nightmares about needles and white coats, her inexplicable fear of confined spaces, the way certain medical equipment made her physically ill. We were trying to create enhanced immune systems, accelerated healing, extended lifespans. The government wanted super soldiers, but Dr. Reeves convinced them we could start with disease resistance. Chen's voice cracked. 47 children died before we achieved a stable genetic modification in you. Marcus stepped forward from where he'd been standing guard by the door. That's why her baby's blood work showed those anomalies. The modifications are hereditary. Sarah's blood turned to ice. "What does this mean for my child?" Dr. Chen exchanged a loaded glance with Marcus before answering. "Your daughter will be born with extraordinary capabilities, enhanced strength, superior cognitive function, immunity to most diseases, but—" He hesitated. "But what?" Sarah's voice rose dangerously. "The modifications come with a price. Every enhanced subject develops a dependency on a specific enzyme compound. Without regular doses, the enhanced cells begin attacking normal tissue. It's why we had to keep detailed records on that bus. We needed to monitor the long-term effects." The pieces fell together with sickening precision. Sarah remembered her mysterious childhood illness that required monthly vitamin shots until she was 16. Her parents had claimed the treatments were for a rare metabolic disorder. "You've been maintaining me this entire time," she realized. Those shots weren't vitamins. Dr. Reeves embedded himself in the local medical community after the project was shut down. He's been synthesizing the enzyme and ensuring you received it through various covers. Allergy shots, vitamin B12 injections, anything that wouldn't raise suspicion. Marcus's phone buzzed urgently. His face darkened as he read the message. "We need to move, now. Government vehicles just past the bottom checkpoint." Dr. Chen moved with surprising speed for his age, pulling vials and syringes from a locked cabinet. "Sarah, this is enough enzyme compound for 6 months. After that, you'll need to find another way to synthesize it, or both you and your daughter will die." "There has to be another solution," Sarah protested, as Chen pressed the cold vials into her hands. "Some way to reverse the modifications." Dr. Reeves spent 20 years trying to find a cure. The genetic changes are too deeply integrated. "But Sarah," Chen gripped her shoulders with desperate intensity, "your daughter represents the perfected version of what we were trying to achieve. The modifications in her will be stable, complete. She won't need the enzyme supplements." A distant rumble of engines grew closer. Marcus was already gathering equipment and destroying computer files. "Sarah, we have 60 seconds before this place is compromised." "Why are they after us?" she demanded, even as she pocketed the vials. "The project ended decades ago, over my dead body." "That may be exactly what they're planning," Marcus said grimly. "The child is more valuable than the mother at this point." The sound of car doors slamming echoed from outside. Chen thrust a manila envelope into Sarah's hands. Your complete medical records, the enzyme synthesis formula, everything you'll need. There's a back exit through the storage room. They moved through the darkened hospital corridors like ghosts, Chen leading them through a maze of forgotten passages. Behind them, Sarah could hear voices shouting orders and boots pounding on linoleum. As they reached the storage room's rear exit, Chen stopped and turned to her one final time. "Sarah, I need you to understand. What we did was monstrous, but your daughter represents hope. She's the first generation to inherit stable modifications. She could be the key to healing instead of destruction." "I don't care about her potential," Sarah said fiercely. "I just want her safe." "Then run," Chen whispered. "And whatever happens, don't let them take her." The emergency exit opened onto a moonless night, filled with the distant sound of approaching helicopters. The abandoned medical facility stretched before them like a tomb carved into the mountainside. Elena's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing corridors lined with empty gurneys and shattered glass. Her breath came in short puffs in the frigid air, each step echoing off the concrete walls. Marcus stayed close behind her, his own light sweeping the shadows. "We shouldn't be here," he whispered, but his voice carried no conviction. They both knew they had come too far to turn back now. The documents they'd found on the bus had led them here, to the Meridian Research Center, a place that officially never existed. According to the papers scattered across the bus floor, this facility had been conducting genetic experiments for decades, using unwilling subjects drawn from nearby communities, and Elena's mother had been one of them. "Room 217, Elena muttered, checking the faded numbers on the doors they passed. That's where Dr. Voss kept his primary research files. The hallway stretched endlessly ahead, lined with doors that hung open like dead mouths. Through the doorways, Elena glimpsed examination tables with leather restraints, IV stands draped with tubing like metallic vines, and walls covered with charts tracking human specimens by number rather than name. Her hand instinctively moved to her swollen belly. The baby kicked, as if sensing her distress. She had to know the truth about what they'd done to her mother, what genetic modifications might have been passed down to her, and what that meant for her unborn child. "Here," Marcus said, stopping at a door marked with the numbers they sought. The office beyond was larger than the others, dominated by filing cabinets and a massive desk. Papers were scattered everywhere, as if someone had left in a hurry. Elena moved to the nearest cabinet and pulled open a drawer. Inside were hundreds of files, each labeled with a participant number and date range. "Look for 1987 to 1989, she said, her fingers walking through the folders. "That's when my mother would have been here." Marcus pulled open another drawer. "Elena, some of these dates go back to the 1960s. How long was this place operating?" She didn't answer, too focused on her search. Then her fingers stopped on a file marked Subject 847, Phase 3 Trials 1988-1989. She pulled it out with trembling hands and opened it. The photograph clipped to the inside cover made her knees buckle. It was her mother, but younger than Elena had ever seen her, lying on an examination table with electrodes attached to her temples. Her eyes were open but vacant, staring at nothing. "Dear God," Marcus breathed, reading over her shoulder. The file detailed a series of experiments designed to activate dormant genetic sequences in pregnant women. The goal was to create offspring with enhanced immune systems, accelerated healing, and resistance to environmental toxins. But the process required multiple procedures throughout pregnancy, and the survival rate for both mothers and children was less than 40%. Elena's vision blurred as she read further. Her mother had been subject 847. She had undergone 17 separate procedures over the course of her pregnancy, and the baby she'd been carrying, Elena, had been designated as a successful modification. "This explains everything," Elena whispered. "Why I never got sick as a child. Why cuts healed so fast my mother would panic and make excuses to the neighbors. Why she was always so afraid someone would take me away." Marcus pointed to the bottom of the file. "Look at this." There's a note about genetic instability in second-generation offspring. It says the modifications could cause severe complications during pregnancy unless... Elena snatched the paper from his hands and read the rest. Unless the mother received regular doses of a stabilizing compound during the second and third trimesters. Without it, both mother and child would likely die from cascading organ failure. "The medication in the bus," she said, understanding flooding through her. "That's what it was. Someone was leaving doses for me." A sound echoed from the corridor behind them, footsteps slow and deliberate. Marcus grabbed Elena's arm. "We need to go, now!" But Elena was already moving to the next filing cabinet, pulling out folders frantically. There have to be records about the compound, how to synthesize it, where to find it. "Elena!" Marcus's voice was sharp with fear. The footsteps were getting closer. Elena stuffed several files into her jacket and followed Marcus toward a back exit she'd spotted. As they reached the door, she heard a familiar voice calling from the main corridor. "Ms. Vasquez? I know you're here. We need to talk." It was Dr. Harriet Chen, the physician who had been treating her pregnancy. The woman who had insisted Elena's complications were purely genetic, who had recommended the specialist in Denver, who had seemed so concerned about her welfare. Elena's blood turned to ice as she realized the truth. Dr. Chen hadn't been trying to help her. She'd been monitoring her, waiting to see how the second-generation modifications would manifest. And now, she'd found them. The laboratory beneath the bus felt like a tomb as Elena clutched the medical files against her chest, her heart hammering so violently she feared it might wake the child sleeping inside her. Dr. Morrison's pale face loomed in the fluorescent light, his confession hanging between them like a blade waiting to fall. "Your mother wasn't the first," he whispered, his voice cracking with 20 years of buried guilt. "There were others before her, women who came to me desperate, dying, carrying children they couldn't save through conventional means." Elena's legs trembled. She sank onto the metal stool, the cold seeping through her clothes. How many others? The files scattered across the floor as Elena's hands shook uncontrollably. "Genetic markers? What are you talking about?" Morrison moved to the far wall, pressing his palm against a hidden panel. A section slid away, revealing rows of glass vials filled with an opalescent fluid that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. "Your condition isn't random, Elena. It's hereditary. A genetic anomaly that manifests during pregnancy, triggering cellular breakdown in the mother while simultaneously creating something extraordinary in the child." "Extraordinary how?" The words came out as barely a whisper. "Enhanced immunity, accelerated healing, cognitive abilities that border on the impossible." He lifted one of the vials, studying the swirling contents. "Your mother was the breakthrough. Her treatment not only saved her life, but preserved these abilities in you, dormant until your own pregnancy triggered them." Morrison's silence stretched like a chasm. "What happened to them?" Elena's voice rose, echoing off the metal walls. "The early treatments were imperfect. We lost 12 of them. But their children," he gestured toward a bank of monitors displaying what looked like surveillance footage. "Their children survived. Thrived, even." The screens showed images of teenagers and young adults in what appeared to be a compound somewhere far from here. They moved with fluid grace, their eyes holding an intelligence that seemed almost alien. Elena watched a girl no older than 16 lift a steel beam with casual ease, while another seemed to phase partially through a wall. "You've been watching them, studying them." Nausea rose in Elena's throat. "We're all just experiments to you, but you kept this place, kept the equipment." Elena stood on unsteady legs, backing toward the ladder. "I won't let you experiment on my baby." "I'm not asking you to." Morrison's voice carried desperate sincerity. "The treatment your mother received, I've perfected it. One injection, and both you and your child will survive. You'll be free to live your lives however you choose. I ask nothing in return. And I'm supposed to trust you, after everything you've told me? Look at the monitors again, Elena. Really look." She glanced back at the screens, and her breath caught. In the corner of one image, she could see a sign partially obscured by foliage, Haven Valley Community Center. She knew that name. It was a place she'd heard about in whispers, a retreat for gifted children, a sanctuary where families went when nowhere else would accept them. "They're not prisoners," Morrison said softly. "They're a community. Families who chose to stay together, to help their children understand their gifts. Some left and integrated into the world. Others found peace there." Elena's hand instinctively moved to her belly as the baby kicked, stronger than ever before. She could feel something changing inside her, a warmth spreading through her veins that felt both foreign and familiar. "If I agree to this," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind, "I want copies of everything, every file, every record, every piece of research. My child deserves to know the truth about what they are." Morrison nodded slowly. "Of course. And after the treatment, we disappear. You never contact us, never try to find us. You have my word." Elena looked one last time at the monitors, at the children who shared her impossible legacy, then back at the man who held her fate in his weathered hands. Outside, thunder rumbled across the mountains, and she realized the storm was finally breaking. "You have to understand," Dr. Hartwell said, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Your father never knew you were one of the children. The adoption records were sealed, scattered across different agencies. He thought he was saving you from the very experiments he'd helped create." Sarah's legs gave out, and she sank onto one of the torn bus seats. The irony was suffocating. Her father had spent years trying to cure her rare genetic condition, never realizing he had helped engineer it in the first place. The experimental gene therapy that had been tested on orphaned children 25 years ago had created a dormant mutation, one that would activate during pregnancy and attack the developing fetus. "The other children," she whispered. "What happened to them?" "Most died before reaching adulthood. Their bodies couldn't handle the modifications. You were the exception, Sarah. Your natural genetic makeup somehow stabilized the alterations, but it came with a price." She pressed her hand to her swollen belly, feeling the baby's restless movements. "My child is going to die because of what they did to me." "Not necessarily." Dr. Hartwell moved closer, his eyes intense despite his obvious exhaustion. "That's why I've been searching for you, why I've been living in exile for 15 years. I found something." From his coat pocket, he withdrew a small vial filled with an amber-colored serum. "I've been working on a genetic correction protocol. It's untested, but theoretically it could neutralize the harmful mutations while preserving your natural immunity." Sarah stared at the vial, hope and terror warring in her chest. "Theoretically?" The bus groaned as another gust of wind slammed against it. Sarah thought of her husband David, probably frantic with worry by now. She thought of the nursery they'd painted together, the tiny clothes folded in the dresser, the name they'd chosen. Emma. They were going to call her Emma. "There's something else," Dr. Hartwell continued. "The people who funded the original experiments, they're still out there. They've been monitoring the surviving children, waiting to see if the modifications would manifest. If they learn you're alive and that you've reproduced, they'll come for my baby. They'll come for both of you. The research potential of a second-generation subject would be invaluable to them." Sarah's mind raced. She thought about the strange phone calls David had mentioned, the feeling of being watched that had plagued her for months. Her sudden decision to take this mountain road hadn't been random. She'd been running from something she couldn't name. "How long do I have?" she asked. "Based on your condition, the baby will trigger the final phase of the mutation within days. After that," he didn't need to finish. Sarah looked around the abandoned bus, at the scattered belongings of children who had suffered unimaginable horrors. She thought of her father, who had spent his final years desperately trying to cure a disease he'd unknowingly helped create. The weight of generational trauma pressed down on her, but beneath it she felt something else rising, determination. "If I take the treatment and survive, will my baby be normal?" More than normal. The corrected genes would make her immune to dozens of genetic disorders. She'd be healthier than any naturally conceived child. And if I don't take it, you both die, and the truth dies with us. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling Emma's movements grow weaker. Time was running out. When she opened them again, she found a strength she didn't know she possessed. "Give me the serum." Dr. Hartwell hesitated. "Sarah, you need to understand." "I understand perfectly." She held out her hand. "My father spent his life trying to atone for his mistakes. I won't let his sacrifice be meaningless, and I won't let those monsters claim another generation." Whatever happened next, she would face it as her father had taught her, with courage, love, and an unwavering commitment to protecting the innocent. Emma would live. Sarah would make sure of it. The needle pierced her skin, and everything changed.